Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Sheri Wiggins, and I am the author of Appalachian Historical Fiction / romance. My first book that came out in December of 2025 is Maggie's Mountain Song. And as you can see by the cover, you see the old truck and the girl in the 1940s style clothes. It is set in 1930s, 1940s in Appalachia. And I live in Appalachia. Quite proud to live here. I've lived in Johnson City, Tennessee for going on 35 years. Seems like a lifetime, but have enjoyed every minute of it. I'm not from here. I was born and raised in Illinois and Arkansas. Got married, lived in Tucson, Arizona for quite a while. And I've always had a desire to write. I think most authors who wind up writing will tell you that writing was a desire that they'd always had. And you will do it whether you're publishing or not. Whenever I was a kid, I used to write short stories for friends, making them the heroine of the story. And it was something I enjoyed doing. So whenever I decided to write, I had no idea where to start. And so I had made several attempts, had walked away, and actually I started a story way back in about 1980, I believe it was, something like that. And I am a history nut. Our whole family is history nuts. And so I always knew I wanted to write historical stories. And I had this ideal of writing a story about a young woman in the colonial times during the American Revolution. I love that era. I love the history of our nation's birth. I love stories of the heroism and the resolve that it took for the leaders of our country, that they placed their fortunes and their lives in jeopardy. And many of them did lose everything, including their lives. But so I love that. I'm a very patriotic person. I love the stories centered around that. So my first story I thought was going to be about the American Revolution. I hadn't gotten 3 pages in, and I suddenly realized I lacked the education. I was a high school dropout, and I had gotten my GED, but I still, just because you pass a GED doesn't mean that you've received, enough education to really float you to do something like this. So I put away my story and became, a mother, raised 4 children, went through a big move. My husband and I lived out in Arizona. We left Arizona and came back east, wound up in northeast Tennessee, and lost my husband to a brain tumor in 2001. And so life has just been, a series of ups and downs, as it is for most people. And I wound up remarrying. The marriage was a disaster and ended in divorce. And after that, I knew I had to go to school. I had to learn something. So I went to school at 49 years old. I had to take remedial math and was almost always the oldest in my class. But I found the young people to be very accepting and very respectful. And I graduated cum laude, so I was quite proud of that. I found that I was a much better student as an adult. When I was a kid, I was in school because I had to be, not because I wanted to be. So whenever I did go to college as an adult, I was there because I wanted to be there, and I did much better. So I still, after completing college, I had thought I was going to go into the medical field. And the year after I graduated from college, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So, I went through that experience and, went through a double bilateral mastectomy and all the mental trauma that goes with that. And so a long story short, here I am many years down the road, and I finally decided to get started. And I'd started having this idea of writing a story about a young woman from the perspective of her later years, where she has lived her life. She's now old, much older than I am now even. And she is reflecting on her life and God's blessings in her life. And she is choosing, in spite of her losses, to dwell on the good things that came to her in life and the blessings that she received, and acknowledge God's presence in her life, even through the trials and the hard things that she went through. That as those of you who are also believers in Christ, that God does not promise us a bed of roses. He doesn't promise us a life free of pain, or a life that everything goes our way and we get everything we want. It does not happen that way. So what He gives us is the strength and the fortitude to go through these things and to bear it with grace and dignity, and hopefully showing the life of Christ through our trials and tribulations. So that's kind of the angle that Maggie is telling her story from. She lets herself be very vulnerable and talks about her own shortcomings. Sorry, I had a bird fly through. Her own shortcomings and how her weaknesses caused great pain in her life. And I just wanted to write a character that was real. I don't like reading a book myself where, I don't like highfalutin names. Sorry, if you do, that's great. But it's not me. It's not what I like to read, and it's not what I like to read about. So I give my characters just real names, and often do research, for an area to find out what type of names are more common in that area. So if you would imagine that in our Appalachian Mountains, we have a lot of names that come from Scotland and Ireland and Wales and England. That's probably the majority of our surnames in the mountains here. So that's the character of Maggie. And so she starts in her childhood. She gives her family background, which is, looking back, I probably made it more complicated than it needed to be, but it's my first book, and so I'm learning a lot. But Maggie quite early on discovers she has a problem with jealousy, and that when somebody, crosses her, she has a hard time forgiving. So I had someone tell me that section of the book they could really relate to, because they also had a problem with, feeling jealous and stuff. And so hopefully I made Maggie's character someone, that wasn't so far above us that you're like, yeah, well, she's not real. I wanted Maggie to feel real and sound real. So much so that my editors, for the longest time, I kept having to tell them, this is not a biography. They kept thinking it was a biography, and it's not. It's not a biography. There are elements of Maggie, yes, that came from my life. But I gave Maggie a very happy childhood. I gave Maggie the childhood I would have liked to have had. Not that my childhood could have been a lot worse than it was, but I gave Maggie the childhood I would have loved to have had. And so the story is centered around real history. Sorry, mosquitoes are starting to bite. So, and just so you know, this is my YouTube channel. This is my first video. It's probably gonna be as rough as to just show you that I'm just very real. I am a Appalachian woman. I am a grandmother and a mother, and I am not comfortable putting my face out there. So this is something I've kind of almost had to put a gun in my own back and make myself do. But here I am, just being real for you, and telling you, about Maggie in my book. Now, my videos are going to, I've tried to put some thought into it as to what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to keep my videos somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes. I don't know at this point how often I will post, but what I want to do is talk about my characters, because one of the things I found when I was finished with the book, I missed Maggie. I had lived in her head so long, and she felt like a real person to me. And in fact, I told my sister whenever I was writing, I had ideas of where my story was going to start, where it was going to go. I did not even make a real outline. The outline was more in my head than it was on my computer. So I told my sister, I said, these characters, they won't behave the way that I thought that they would. They just do what they want to do. She said, they're your characters. Make them do what you want. I'm like, I can't make them. They do what they want. And I've since learned from other authors that, yeah, that's exactly what an author experiences. You start out thinking you know this person, and they evolve just like people do. And so Maggie, she evolves, but sorry, and I'm wandering, and I am not going to stop this and start it over. I have just been told, warts and all, here I am. And that was a phrase that Maggie and Robbie use in the book, is that, they loved each other, warts and all. So, this me, warts and all, here I am. But I am going to be talking about each different video, maybe about a different character, and kind of a little bit about what I learned about them as I wrote my story. And some of them really evolved. Some of them was the anchor that the other characters kind of drew strength from. Granddad Spencer. So he's kind of he is the elder of the family, and he's also the spiritual head of the family. And so Maggie learns a great deal from her grandfather, and he's the one who kind of helps her to grow and influenced her to strive to be, a Christian and live a Christ-like life. Her parents were good people, but they weren't church-going people. So that's kind of where the story comes from. And I think all of us, in our childhood and stuff, we had our friends. And then you had that one person that just absolutely got under your skin, drove you nuts. You wish they weren't in your life, and there wasn't a thing you could do to get rid of them. Here they were. And so Maggie has one of those. She's got that person in her life that drives her crazy. She's very different from Maggie, and Maggie doesn't tolerate fools lightly. And, I can relate to that. I don't either. But, as civilized people, we have to learn how to at least control our own self, even if you can't control somebody else. So that's something Maggie has a hard time learning with her sometimes friend, who actually winds up being her arch enemy. But the story also centers around real history. I am a stickler for real history. My favorite author is Bodhi Taney. If any of you have read Bodhi's books, she is a master storyteller. When I grow up, I want to be Bodhi. So I would read her books, and I would read a bit of history, and I would say, that can't be true. And I'd look it up, and sure enough, it would be true. I loved that. I loved that little tiny, tiny details. If you look it up and then find out that's factual, that's real, that existed in that time period or whatever. Because there were times when I would say, that wasn't around then. And then when I would look it up, I would find, yes, it was. So I'm a stickler for history. There have been certain things I've wanted to include in my stories and haven't, because they don't fit the historical time frame. So it galls me, but I won't do it. Not, it's fiction. I understand that. Yet my history in my stories, I want to be factual. So I do a lot of research to make sure that just little things are historically correct. And so with Maggie's Mountain Song, there are things like there was a flood in August of 1940 that affected our entire region here in Appalachia. I'm in Johnson City, and even this far down the mountain was very affected. In fact, it's almost freakish how similar that storm was to Helene. And those of you who paid attention to the news when that storm hit knows that the Appalachian Mountains in our area was absolutely devastated. And there are some things that will never be the same. I live about 10 miles from Irwin, where a dam had burst further upstream on the Nolichucky River. And it was absolutely awful, the devastation that did. There was many people killed, not anyone that I knew personally, but like my son-in-law, he worked with a man whose wife was in a factory that got washed away, and she lost her life in that. But that happened in 1940 as well, and the circumstances were almost identical. It was a stalled hurricane that dumped just I can't remember right now how many inches. It's documented in Maggie's Mountain Song, but it dumped inches of rain on Appalachia. And what happened was, prior to that, the area had been, the logging industry had come in and just ravished the mountains. Took out trees. Instead of selective logging, they just took out trees nilly-willy. And there was nothing to absorb the water. There was no roots in the soil to hold the soil. And so what happened was massive mudslides. And there was, it's in Maggie's Mountain Song. I can't remember right off the top of my head, but hundreds of mudslides in Watauga County alone. It was awful. And there were things that never were the same. The railroad that ran from Boone, North Carolina to Johnson City. And Johnson City was a major railway hub from way back, even in the Civil War. So that was interrupted. The Tweetsie Railroad was knocked out by this 1940 flood. So similar to Helene. But it goes through World War II, and I've just about used up my time here. And I've not even gotten to the fact that Robbie, the young man who Maggie grows up with, he is a real laid-back sort of fella. And so he's patient with Maggie, but their friendship, was interrupted for quite some time because of Maggie's jealousy. But they had patched up their friendship, and they were friends by time Robbie goes off to World War II. And there's a lot that I'm just skipping over because I don't want to tell you everything. I want you to read the book. And but I love that time period as well, the history. And so I chose a regiment for Robbie to be a part of that was real. It was the Army 30th Infantry Division, I believe, called Old Hickory, and it was named after Andrew Jackson. And so the story follows the actual movements and battles that this regiment was in World War III. We don't want that. World War II that Robbie was a part of. So he's a fictional character woven into real history. So that's the kind of stuff I write. So enough about Maggie's Mountain Song, because I'll be talking about that more. I want to kind of break down the different people with their character traits and stuff. And what I would really like, and what I'm asking for, is that if you like history, if you like historical fiction, read my book. Read Maggie's Mountain Song. I believe that you will love it. It's a very touching, heartwarming story. It's got its funny parts. It's got its incredibly sad parts. And, it's a book that will make you laugh and make you cry. And I know because I did both writing it. And when you read it, I really want to get to know my readers. I want to chat with you. I'd like for you to leave messages, and maybe we can kind of dialogue back and forth about different questions. If you have questions about the characters or events, drop them in the comments and I will respond to you, I promise. And let's talk about it. Maggie's Mountain Song, available on Amazon. It's also available at my website, which is author SheriWiggins.net. You can also find it on Ingram Spark. And if you're that person that likes a Audible or audiobook, it's available on Audible, Spotify, all the major streaming platforms. And I can tell you, a lady named Kat Bone was my narrator. Phenomenal. The woman is so gifted as a narrator, as she brought Maggie to life. I sat and cried when I listened to it the first time, because she just nailed Maggie. She just absolutely nailed it, brought her to life, and just gave her so much character and gave the story its flavor and its character. I had considered narrating it. I hate my own voice. That's one of the things that I knew was going to be hard for me to do these videos, because I hate my voice. I hate my face. But I have decided I'm just going to be real. I'm just going to be real. I'm going to put myself out there, be vulnerable, and hopefully connect with people who love history, love historical fiction, love historical romance. And just before, I'm just about to wrap things up here, but I have finished my second book, and it also is an Appalachian historical fiction called Rosie of Ripshin Mountain. And Ripshin Mountain is closer to home for me. It sits right up the road near Roan Mountain. So if you are familiar with Northeast Tennessee, then you're very familiar with Roan Mountain. And so there are a lot of historical things in that book as well. Of course, about a girl named Rosie. And it is set in the 1920s primarily. Rosie and her mother and grandmother are herbalists. So if you have an interest in herbs, the granny women, this is what they called an herbalist back in those times. Some people still call an herbalist in these mountains granny women. And so here Rosie was 20 years old, but she was referred to as a granny woman. But yeah, we'll talk about that at a later date. But I'm in the editing phases, getting that book ready for print, and hopefully will be available sometime in August is what I'm hoping for. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm just rambling. I'm just being myself. But Maggie's Mountain Song, available on Amazon, Ingram Spark, author SheriWiggins.net, and Audible, Spotify, and all major streaming platforms. I hope you enjoy it.